Confirmation hearings for President-elect Trump's cabinet nominees are continuing today on Capitol Hill. Attorney General pick Pam Bondi and Secretary of State nominee Marco Rubio, both in front of Senate committees. Democrats were focused on Bondi's close ties to the President-elect Trump and continued to press the Attorney General nominee over her beliefs related to the 2020 election, pardons for January 6 rioters, and whether she's capable of keeping Trump's influence over the Justice Department at bay. Joining us to discuss that and more, Jesse Byrnes, senior editor here at The Hill. Hey, Jesse, I was listening to Bondi's testimony this morning. The ranking Democrat on the committee, Dick Durbin, had an interesting point. He quoted some Republicans from previous Attorney General hearings, confirmation hearings, where they were saying that it's very important for the Attorney General to be independent, willing to stand up for the president, stand up to the president. Now you have an Attorney General nominee who worked for the president, defended him in his first impeachment hearing. Is she a different kind of nominee than we've seen in the past?
Well, she certainly is the kind of nominee that Donald Trump wants at the Department of Justice. Of course, the DOJ under presidents going back a number of years, they've stressed independence from the president. And so it's this odd situation where the president is the one who formally nominates them, but once they're in the job, they are supposed to keep the White House at arm's length on certain topics and certain issues, especially surrounding investigations. Now, for Pam Bondi, of course, she worked on Donald Trump's defense for his first impeachment. She has long been a Trump ally. And I think just kind of taking a step back and realizing that Trump's pick for the number 2, 3, and 4 spot at the Department of Justice have also worked on his personal team for the hush money case for other legal battles over the last year or so. And so this is kind of rounding out the upper echelons of the Department of Justice with allies who are personally trying to advocate for Donald Trump. And so now the fact that she is moving forward to potentially, and it seems like will very likely be confirmed, there are real concerns, especially among Democrats, that will she have that independence?
That wall that was traditionally up between the Justice Department and the president's administration has been kicked down now for good?
Well, I mean, look, Bobby Kennedy served as the Attorney General for his brother. You know, there is precedent in this country of there being close association between the White House and the DOJ. And for many Republicans, they view the DOJ as politicized by the Biden administration. And so they are not willing to accept this argument from Democrats that Pam Bondi and these Trump lawyers, personal lawyers who he's looking to install at the DOJ, that there's any issue there and that the Democrats are just making hay of it.
So the argument is Democrats politicize it, so now we're going to...
Yes, exactly. But I think going forward, even past this nomination hearing, there will be real scrutiny on Bondi and the rest of this team at the DOJ, especially when it comes to Trump's actions early in his term. And if there is any scrutiny within the courts, now you have to remember the DOJ defends the administration in federal cases in court, and so they will have to defend a lot of Trump's actions, and whether that steps into any kind of personal efforts and actions he has taken, that's where the real scrutiny will be.
Let's talk about Marco Rubio. He's the nominee for Secretary of State, also on Capitol Hill today. He's considered a shoo-in. He's going to have some Democrats that vote for him, pretty mainstream in his conservative foreign policy. But considering that, do you think he's going to end up butting heads with the MAGA crowd and the America First mantra?
Well, he's in a very unique situation in that, you know, he has, of course, he's going to be confirmed. The vast majority of the Senate's going to vote to confirm him. We saw even Dick Durbin, senior Democrat, say that he was already going to back him. And so he's kind of the one, you know, typically you see opposing parties, they try to look for that 1 or 2 cabinet members that they can support so that they're not saying no to every single person. And Rubio's the clear favorite. He works in the Senate right now. They know him. They know he's going to bring some semblance of stability to the Trump administration, especially on foreign policy. But Rubio's in a tricky situation as well because his portfolio at the State Department is vast. You know, when you talk about tariffs on other countries, when you talk about trying to isolate certain adversaries on the world stage, he will be the person responsible for doing that. And going back to the first Trump administration, you know, you had Mike Pompeo in the role of Secretary of State, and there were certainly times where Trump would, you know, take the lead and, you know, issue foreign policy by tweet, and now he'll do foreign policy by Truth Social, I think. And so, you know, Rubio will be in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain to the world's allies and adversaries where the U.S. stands on some of these topics. But we saw him really actually strike a tone of America First in his opening statement today. And I think you're going to see more of that, especially in the early period of this term.
Let's go back to yesterday. Pete Hegseth, the SEDEF nominee, was before the Senate Armed Services Committee. Democrats had a couple of months to prepare for this. Were you impressed by their prosecution of the case against Hegseth yesterday?
Well, I think for Washington broadly, there was a little bit of skepticism. Would Democrats actually come to the table with anything new? And we didn't really see anything new in those hearings. Of course, there's sound bites that they're all going to post and they're going to try to. But at the end of the day, there's nothing in that hearing that's going to tank his nomination. If anything, he has really, he came prepared. He bolstered his case for confirmation, and if anything, has helped with some of these other nominees who are also facing difficult paths, like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr. To try to mollify some of the Republican concerns. Republicans, they just need 53 votes, and they can afford to lose a few and still get confirmation. And Pete Hegseth, I think, did a lot of the assuaging of those concerns in his hearing.
Let's talk about Congress. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries made some comments saying that he thinks Republicans are going to have big problems getting their agenda passed with their razor-thin majority. Republicans haven't yet settled on a legislative strategy. There's still talk of one reconciliation bill versus two. Does Jeffries have a point? Republicans are due for a reality check once they take full control?
Absolutely, and I think that reality check is going across the board in Congress right now. Republicans just have a few seat margin in both chambers. For the House, really, they have no margin of error when it comes to keeping their caucus together. And so for things like reconciliation, where you have all these disparate factions in the House Republican caucus that have different things that they want to get done, there's different strategies, obviously, for how to do that. And so Speaker Johnson has come out with a very aggressive timeline in terms of trying to get budget reconciliation done. You have to remember, they have to first pass this vehicle for reconciliation, which is the budget resolution, and that actually sets them up to be able to pass this with just a simple majority. But even that, getting that done, is a heavy lift, and doing it within a matter of weeks is a tall task.
So what's the first 100 days going to look like? Where are the wins for unified Republican control of Washington?
Well, the big looming deadline, we're 58 days away from the stopgap funding measure coming up for renewal, and that was something that House Republicans in the Senate, to some extent, punted on that to mid-March. And so in the first 100 days of Trump's administration, when he's trying to focus on immigration, he's trying to focus on tax cuts, they have to just pass a budget, keep the lights on in the federal government. So that's already going to be a tough task. And then you have now fires in California and aid to Los Angeles, as well as immigration and trying to raise the debt ceiling. All of this is coming into focus at the same time. And so really Republicans just have to pick and choose. Not everything, they can't prioritize everything at the same time.
I want to quickly ask you about the External Revenue Service. This is a new department, I guess, that Trump has announced to rival the Internal Revenue Service. But it's interesting because he says this is going to be the department that collects tariffs and other revenue from foreign countries. Trump has been threatening these day one tariffs throughout the campaign leading up to inauguration. But there's been conflicting reports of whether he's going to use like emergency powers to implement them from day one or use a more deliberate process that we saw during the first administration. That seems like a pretty important decision that's coming.
It's a huge decision, and I think with this we'll see if the external IRS name sticks. But essentially rebranding this idea of tariffs. He's talked about tariffs for decades. His strategy with Canada, Mexico, and China has been very aggressive. And so what we're seeing with him is how does he formulate that? And that's formalize that within the federal government. And that's a big question that goes to a lot of different things, like Elon Musk in this Department of Government Efficiency. How do these grand plans for reducing the federal government's spending, these grand plans for actually implementing tariffs and collecting it and streamlining the process, how do they do that? Congress is not necessarily going to pass a bill to establish this new formal department, but they do need some type of legal underfooting because they are going to face a number of legal challenges for a lot of these issues that they want to pass.
Those tariffs on day one, potential for a big impact on the economy, so we'll continue
to
follow that closely. Jesse Byrnes, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
Officials in Los Angeles reporting slow but critical progress in containing the several major fires that continue to burn in the area. The Eaton fire near Pasadena now 45% contained, as nearly 3,400 personnel continue to battle the flames. Meantime, the Palisades fire continues to smolder. Officials are on high alert as the sustained high winds threaten to fuel new fires. News Nation's Brooke Schaefer is in Pacific Palisades with how first responders are preparing.
There is still the potential for high winds across the Los Angeles area, and that, of course, a major concern for these thousands of firefighters who are on the ground right now working to contain these fires. We know that there are thousands of firefighters stationed across Southern California, and they are monitoring hotspots and they are monitoring the forecast as well, hoping to prevent more scenes like this one. This is what happened last week when thousands of people were told to pack up their things and evacuate quickly, except there was so much traffic, so many people trying to evacuate at the same time that people were actually told, never mind, get out of your cars and run. And this is what's happening here. Here in the Palisades, this was the largest fire that started last week. As of today, that fire now about 19% contained. Firefighters on the ground telling me it could be weeks before that fire is 100% contained.
We're talking about weeks here, at least, yeah. Have to make sure the smolders are completely put out. Just think about the effort that takes sometimes. You dump all this water and you come back and then it's still smoldering.
Now, there was also a threat of high winds yesterday. The National Weather Service here in Los Angeles said those winds didn't materialize as they thought they would. That is the piece of good news. Still, firefighters here on the ground in Los Angeles have told me that these winds are unpredictable, and that is why there is still a serious concern. Drew?
Thank you, Brooke. Meantime, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is facing mounting backlash over her response to the fires. Bass has been criticized for her decision to travel out of the country ahead of the wildfires before she took office in late 2022. Bass had vowed not to go abroad. Bass also approved a budget that decreased funding for the city's fire department. Among her many critics is President-elect Trump, who attacked both Bass and California Governor Gavin Newsom over the fires. Meantime, an online petition calling for Bass to resign has received more than 134,000 signatures. Former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is in jail after he was detained early Wednesday in connection to his decision to declare martial law late last month. He was later impeached for that decision. The former president was questioned by anti-corruption officials Tuesday in the presidential compound, where he has been holed up since his impeachment. Yoon insists the country's anti-corruption agency does not have the authority to investigate his actions, but said he complied to prevent violence. The anti-corruption agency that detained Yoon now has 48 hours to request a court order for his formal arrest, which would allow investigators to extend his detention for 20 days before being required to hand the case over to prosecutors for an indictment. Yoon faces a potential rebellion charges. If convicted, he could serve life in prison or even the death penalty. The Security and Exchange Commission is taking on billionaire Elon Musk in a new lawsuit related to his 2022 Twitter takeover, alleging failure to disclose his share of Twitter stock shortchanged other shareholders by as much as $150 million. The complaint alleges Musk had slowly begun buying Twitter stock, amassing more than 5% of shares in the company by March of 2022, and was required to disclose the size of his stake within 10 days of hitting that mark. The SEC goes on to allege that Musk failed to disclose his stake, leaving shareholders in the dark and causing them to sell at lower prices. In October of that year, Musk closed the $44 billion buyout and took the company private. In a statement, Musk's lawyer called the suit a sham and claimed the suit was a parting shot from the outgoing Biden administration. The Food and Drug Administration announcing Wednesday a ban on food dye red number 3. Over 30 years after scientists found links to cancer in animals. The synthetic additive made from petroleum is used in foods, beverages, and ingested drugs as a bright cherry red color. The move comes after a petition in late 2022 submitted by multiple advocacy organizations. Food manufacturers now have until January of 2027 to reformulate their products. Drug manufacturers have until January of 2028. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.